Okay, so we're recording. As you can see, my background looks just a little bit different tonight. I was telling Rachel before we got started that I'm actually at the church because we have a church service immediately following this. So we may even be about 5 minutes but early ending because I got to put a choir robe on and run to do the next thing. But I for sure wanted to have our final session. It seems like it's been forever since we've seen each other, and yet it's familiar all at the same time. And if we had not had tornado warnings, I had planned to be playing RESPECT tonight once we started our session, or as you came into the session, but I was going to sing it differently, REFLECT, because that's kind of our word for tonight, is to reflect. And I decided I might not be able to spell that word and sing it all at the same time on the virtual session with it recording, so I just spelled it for you saying it. So that's close enough, right? That'll be a good start for us. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen, as always. And we will start by looking at where we are on the syllabus, which of course you know where we are. It is crazy to think that the last time we met was back in March. And now it's April 18th, and this is our 8th week and our final session, which makes perfect sense then that tonight our goal will be to reflect and to debrief and to think about basically this semester as a whole, and then think about our year of learning as a whole. We have had a school year of learning together now at this point. Really amazing to think about all the conversations that we've had, all the thinking that has been provoked, and all of the collaboration that we've had around thinking about assignments that matter, and then the skills and instruction that go along with that. So tonight, we're going to really be focusing in on how did this module go? We've talked a lot this semester about customization. We've talked a lot this semester about differentiation, and of course, then applying all that we've talked about all year long through this module. And so that's what we're going to be looking at together. And then we'll talk about some next steps in completing the course, and that'll finish us up. And it will make me really happy for everybody, because that means summer's not too far away, and really sad all at the same time because I don't know when I'll see you all again, either virtually or in person. So let's go ahead and dig in, and I'm going to stop talking for just a second. And I'd like to hear just a little bit about, in a brief manner, how did your module go? What was the experience for your students? And what was your experience as the instructor? So Joy, Tina, either one of you want to start us off?
Well, I'm still teaching my unit.
Okay.
But one of the things, which is on writing the research paper, and one of the things that we're doing right now that I had not even thought of until I was reviewing mini tasks to put the module together was where students, you read along with the students, you read an editorial, and then you have reading for meaning paper that has the claim in the center where they have to find the claim, and then they've got to put what is the proof for the positive and what is the proof for the negative. And I could not believe how much trouble they had even finding a claim and understanding what the support was. And so it opened these conversations, and I said, well, I want you to pay attention as we go through this, because if you can't find a claim, you're sure not going to be able to write a claim. And so I was really, this is something I'd never even thought about them not understanding before. You know, you say you state a claim and then you prove it. They were like, well, I guess that was just going whoosh over their head. But so I found this mini task really helpful.
That's really interesting to hear, and what an interesting insight to have instructionally, because you hadn't really accounted for that being something they wouldn't know, but it allowed you to instruct on that and then to be able to move forward, because they'll for sure need that when they write their paper. That's only one piece of this whole process that you were working.
Exactly.
Okay, interesting. All right. Hi, Julie. We're glad you joined us tonight. We're reflecting and debriefing, and we're starting just kind of with our overall experience with this module. So feel free to pipe in at some point about how your module went and what was the experience for your students.
I thought it was a good experience. My kids' writing pieces seemed to turn out pretty well. I feel like though I did a lot of hand holding at the beginning. But mine worked out nicely because it was a social studies module, and I teach reading and social studies. And so I was able to kind of do some of the activities in my social studies class, and it overlapped with what we were talking about, and the timing of it actually worked out perfectly. So that was really nice that they were getting like extra instruction and background knowledge built, for their writing piece, which, like I said, they turned out better than pieces that they've done before.
Oh, that's nice.
So
yeah. That's an interesting observation. You know me, Julie. I'm going to ask another question to follow that up right behind that. So my question for you is, what do you think contributed to the writing being better than you've seen previously?
The amount of time that we spent on it, and also just like the mini tasks and, just very focused, guided instruction.
I definitely think that very focused instruction is one of the key things that we as teachers all get to see when you put a module into play, because that sequencing, that tight sequencing that happens is what we know is kind of happening in our head all along, and it becomes more and more transparent with the kind of planning you do on the front end to get ready to do a module. It's interesting too that you said to me that you felt like you kind of had to hold their hands at first a little bit, and I'm wondering though, the holding of the hands really indicates to me where kids were skill wise, right, in what they needed skill wise, and you'd accounted for it evidently in the scaffolding of the skills. I'm wondering if that contributed to the difference in the product that you got at the end.
There were a couple of things that I ended up doing along the way too. Like I didn't stick completely to the mini tasks and all that kind of stuff. Like there was just like one thing in particular with my lower group, well, my lower class, because we're ability group, so I have two classes. One of them is significantly lower than the other one. They both have issues, but my lower class, we ended up splitting them into two groups. So we identified the kids who we thought were capable of like producing 3 body paragraphs, and then the kids who were just going to push for the 1. And so now when we talk about like our K-Prep writing test, it's interesting. The kids don't say anything about it. I'm surprised that no one's like questioning anything. I took the higher group with me, and we worked in the hallway, and I had more kids with me in the hallway than the kids that stayed in the room. But I told them when we first got started, I said, I just want to let you know the kids in the room are doing 1 paragraph and you're doing 3. I said, that's not going to be an issue. And I just told them at the beginning that there's a difference, and there's a difference for a reason, and they don't need to question it, and this is what it's going to be. And they all they understand. And so when I talk about it in class, like when I'm reviewing how to write a piece, because that's all we're really talking about right now is just K-Prep writing, So I talk about, how do you do an introduction? That's the same for everybody. I'm like, how do you do a conclusion? That's the same for everybody. And then I'm like, all right, so body paragraphs, raise your hand if you're doing a 3.8, raise your hand if you're doing 3 body paragraphs. And they know like what is expected of them. And I feel like with the LDC, we really kind of like hammered that home with what the writing expectations are for the kids at their different levels, which is working out. So
interesting. Which really and truly, that's a beautiful piece for what I wanted to talk about next, which was that differentiation and customization. So I want to swing back around to that when we get to that particular question, but I want to hear from Tina first, and that way everybody will have had a chance to talk about how their module went, and then we'll go into that customization piece. Thanks for sharing, Julie. Are you finished with your module, Julie?
Yeah, we finished it. The kids literally wrote the conclusion yesterday. So
nice.
Yeah, so we haven't done like anything with it yet. And I haven't read through all of them, but the ones that I have read, they're pretty good. So.
Okay, good. All right, Tina, What about you? What about your experience with this module? Tina's frozen in a very interesting look there. It looks like she's posing for us, doesn't it? Okay, well, maybe she may can hear us. I'm not really sure if she can hear all of what we're saying. That's some really good reflection on from both Joy and from Julie, and hopefully we'll get to hear from Tina at some point in the session. And I think that we really have hit on some key things that start to happen when you have the task that's very clearly standards aligned. You have the skills accounted for that students are going to need to be able to do that task. And then you put the instruction to the skills that is clearly aligned to the standards. And so now the whole piece, it's like this piece that seems to just really flow nicely together. And I think some of the things we were hearing people reflect on are actually a reflection of that kind of planning thinking and what happens instructionally for kids when that's been accounted for before you ever begin the module. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, Julie's already shared about some differentiation, and that seems to have gone really well for our students. And that was, of course, in the writing product that was expected of students, and yet they still, and correct me if I'm wrong, Julie, but from what I'm hearing, it sounded like by and large, the only thing that you changed was the amount of writing expected from students who are developmentally at a different place currently, but they were still expected to write on the same task, the same topic, so they were still demonstrating that level of standard for the content. It was just the amount of writing. Is that correct?
Yes. So my higher group, they were doing 3 body paragraphs with like a topic, some details, and a closing. And then my lower group, they were doing a 3.8 body paragraph. So it's just 1 body paragraph. They were still expected to respond to the task, which the task asked them to identify 3 Bill of Rights and explain how they protect our freedoms and limit the power of the government. And so they still had to write about 3 of them. They just did it all in 1 paragraph with the 3.8 structure. And so even the structure of the types of body paragraphs they were writing was different, because 1 versus 3 is going to change up how you organize your information. So
and also the amount of development that would be expected.
Oh yeah, for sure. They were adding like 1 detail to go with each amendment, whereas my other kids, I was telling them at least 3 details for each amendment.
Which is actually a really interesting point in thinking about, I'm thinking back to our conversations that we've had this semester about skills and instruction. And one of the things that we talked about over and over with this differentiation is these tasks sound daunting in a lot of ways when you just think about the task and it being fully standards aligned, and yet you found a way to have all students respond where they are developmentally. Now our job is to make sure that we don't leave students at that level, but we've met them where they are. We've accounted for skill development where they are so that we can take them to the next level and the next level and the next level for them. Joy, what about you? Was there any differentiation that you needed to do in order to meet the needs of the students that you have with this particular module?
Definitely. This activity or reading and finding claims and finding the proofs. With my collaborative group, I did a lot of modeling to start out with, and did the talk aloud, and then we did the whole articles, whole class. And sometimes I'd have them find a claim, and then I'd find a proof, or I'd find a proof and they'd tell me what the claim was. And all but about 3 kids were very engaged and sharing and asking questions. And those 3 kids are the 3 kids that never want to do anything. So you're always on them. But so that's what I did with them. Some of the other classes, depending on their scores, I broke a couple of groups who were capable that after we did after we did it together a little while, then they broke into groups and finished it on their own. And so it just depended on the scores within there, how much they did by themselves and how much I walked them through it.
So you were essentially meeting kids where they were, and the level of group work and planning that where you were a part of the instruction for them versus independence depended on where they seemed to be developmentally on that.
Yes.
Gotcha. Well, so it looks like Tina's still having lots of technical issues. She slipped back out now. Last question on this that I would have is, do you feel like you were able to customize the task that you started with and the skills and the instruction? You know, we had the template that we started with. Do you feel like the customization has been successful for you? And would it be a way that you would like to go in the future in terms of thinking about further modules down the road?
I still had trouble editing and getting things in where I wanted them to be. So a lot of the time I would type it out somewhere else and put the things in so that I could see them more clearly, so that the way I am presenting the module isn't exactly like it looks on in my LDC library, because I still just having trouble manipulating the things, but I found it very helpful.
Good. And the idea of customizing and how to customize
Yes.
your skills and instruction. Okay, well, let's go on now and let's shift to student work. It sounds like, Joy, you're at a place where you work yet, and Julie, you're like just in time in the moment with some student work, but you haven't really had a chance to do a whole lot of analysis with it. And I know that when we were there in person in Lincoln in December, we looked at some student work, whole group in small groups, but in the whole group setting. And I want to talk about tonight, we won't be really looking at the student work so much for the next step decisions, but more about what are some options for you in looking at student work beyond what we did together when we were in person back in December. So I'm going to post in the chat a link. Joy, do you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to make a comment. Even though they're just getting ready to do the actual research paper writing, we have done our second on-demand scrimmage, and the entire English department scored them the first time and the second time, and we saw improvements
Wonderful.
as the group. I mean, they said, we're really impressed. They're able to structure it better. They are putting proofs in. I mean, of course, they can always get better, but the rest of the team said that they could, because we were just doing the junior papers, and they said they could tell a growth from the first to second scrimmage. And Kelly and I attribute a lot of that to what we've been doing with LDC.
Yay, wonderful. That's very exciting. And you know, you've actually just hit on something really important too, in that you had a baseline and that was student work. And now you have a second piece that you know there's been some instructional change, some instructional difference, some tightening of aligning to standards in your instruction along the way. And now you have the second piece to see the growth from first to second. So that's really exciting. The power of looking at student work and using it to truly drive our instruction has really been a theme that we've been working with in my school district all year, and we are really seeing the dividends of that. Tina, you're back. Yay. Woohoo. It's down in the bottom. It almost looks like your connection is like halfway there and half not there. I'm not entirely sure what's going on for you. Joy, were you going to say something else?
I was going to say that one thing, this is the first time we've ever done this, and it worked so well that we were given two days to work on these. And the first day, from the time school started till it ended, we got every junior paper graded and with commentary. And then the second day, we pulled students all day and had one-on-one conferences with them about what they did well and where and how it can improve. And it worked so well. I mean, because we didn't just have our kids. I had students from other teachers and so on, but it seemed to make a big difference, being able to meet one-on-one with each one and going over their writing, that we've decided we're going to, continue to do that.
Conferencing is a really powerful tool when used effectively. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so I've put the link in the chat. If you'll go ahead and click on that link, and it'll take us to a session, to a Learn session in the Learn tab of LDC. I'm going to let you get that pulled up, and then I'm going to share my screen for just a minute because I want to show you what we're going to look at. Let's talk through it. But I want you to have that up so that you know how to get back to it to use for your own benefit. So I'm going to share my screen now. And I've got session 9 pulled up on my screen, scoring and analyzing student work. We've looked at parts of this session together before, part of it in that in-person day when we did the first looking at student work, analyzing the student work. And we looked particularly at that time, we were looking at the difference between scoring and writing. And we come back to it now. So I want us to think for just a few minutes about how we will use this student work. Sounds like, Joy, y'all are really diving into what student work can do for you as well, and how you can use that to have conversations with students so that they can meet you as a partner in their own learning, which is a very powerful thing to do. I want us to focus for just a moment in down here in these 2 cards here, ways to analyze student work and analyzing student work protocol options. So what I'd like for us to do, I'm going to stop sharing in just a second, and I'm going to ask you to just read through really quickly. We're just going to take about 2 minutes, and I'd like for you to look at the 3 different protocol options and think about what your focus would be, and you'll see that there are the 3 different each one of them. Let's look at those and think about how would you like to analyze this student work, and for what purpose will you be analyzing this student work? Are you going to work with a partner? Maybe you have a partner. I know, Tina, you do, and Joy, you do. Julie, I think you do as well. So are you guys going to try to look at this student work together to see what it's showing you? Are you looking for something specific content-wise? Are you looking for something specific in looking at the standards in the student work, or scoring it with the holistic rubric? And then what do you want to do with it? So thinking about all of those things, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute so it'll be easier for you to look at this page and look at the cards on that there. And if you will look at analyzing student work and look at those protocol options really briefly. We'll take about 2 minutes, and then let's talk about what you're seeing and what you're thinking about how you want to score this work and what you want to do with it. What purpose will you use the scoring for? So I'm going to mute myself for a minute while I read. Okay, I know we haven't had a real long time to look at that, but I'd love to hear just what are your initial thoughts of how you want to score the student work, and what you want to be looking for when you look at the student work from this particular module, and for what purpose. What are our thoughts?
I would say at this point in the year, just because we're really close to the end of the year, we would probably just use the rubric to get more of a holistic view of where the kids are, and even the rubric could break it down into, I don't remember what a rubric looks like, to be honest right now, but to see what areas the kids are still struggling in, so we can focus on those specific kids or small groups of kids rather than looking for standards.
Okay, so that's an interesting observation of where you are in the year. Also may determine which protocol you think is the best fit for your purpose with the student work at various points throughout the year. Holistic view. And Carrie says, not Carrie, sorry, Tina says in the chat, I graded mine more for science content. So Tina, keep talking to us via text here. You're gonna have to type fast, type as fast as you talk. But my question for you is do you think then, so Carrie's looking right now, no, Julie is looking right now at holistically where her kids are because of where they are in the year versus an individual standard and where they're meeting that. Yours goes, I'm sorry.
I was just going to add to that where I teach both contents, I teach ELA and social studies. I can check to see if they got the social studies content in other ways. I'm with the LDC, I'm more focused on their writing skills. So that's why I
there's
said
your
rubric as
purpose.
well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. And so then those writing components of the rubric will be the most important things to you at this point. You've been using social studies as a vehicle to give them something to write about in this case. Yeah, totally makes sense. So Tina, for yours, would you say though that the standards analysis might be a better fit for you since you had very specific science standards? I'm curious. So they took 3 drawings and they wrote paragraphs that were explanations for each drawing, if I'm remembering correctly. It was basically the story that went with what was on each drawing, correct? So as far as the protocols for scoring, what do you think is the most important to you? Sinkholes and the processes. Okay, so you were looking more at a scientific process there, and the science content that was in that. As far as scoring the work, will you be looking for how they demonstrated knowledge of the standards in what they put in those paragraphs? Was that what you were looking for? It sounds like you've already graded yours. Yes, and how well they could explain it. So, and that, of course, then how well they could explain it also demonstrated how much of the science content they truly had a conceptual understanding of by what they were able to say beyond just a regurgitation of maybe what they read or looked at previously. Okay. The kids had a lot of trouble putting the process into words. That's really interesting. What an interesting observation. Seeing that in their writing tells you so much as a science teacher. If that's truly, that's a process. Writing about a process, a science process, is a very disciplinary, appropriate skill that students would need. And so that tells you a lot about how they make connections or don't yet make connections conceptually in science. To me, what I'm hearing, and I'm sort of speaking for you here, Tina, so if I'm not saying anything that is around what you were observing, let me know. But to me, that says a lot about what I want to do instructionally, skill-wise. Not so much necessarily content-wise, because I really at this point may have a hard time knowing, do they really not get the content yet conceptually? Or do they not have the developmental skill yet because they haven't had enough practice of putting it into words in a way that will let me know that they get it? So that's interesting in thinking about skills and instruction. What do you do about that as a teacher? I mean, of course, and we are in April of the school year. So is that something worthwhile spending any more time on? Not necessarily that content, but that set of skills of writing about a scientific process and explaining. Be interesting to see what your thoughts are there about next steps based on that pattern of what you saw with the students. Joy, did you have anything you wanted to add, or Carrie, have anything you want to add to that part of the conversation about what you saw with the protocols for student work, analyzing student work?
Well, I'm going to be looking, of course, with teaching English, your content is your writing.
Absolutely.
So that kind of makes it a little bit easier on us, I think, because we can focus on that one thing, and that's what we're trying to teach them. But so I think we're looking at the standards, and then how well they're using the MLA formatting. That's always a difficult thing for them, is putting that in MLA. So we're getting to be more focused on the finer points and not the generalizations right now.
So then that actually sounds to me like that more that standards analysis, because you're looking individually at the standards. And even with the formatting, I would really encourage you to go back and look based on how the kids do. I would encourage you to go back and look in your skills list, in your instructional ladder, and make sure that you feel like you've accounted for where the kids are and were with that in the instruction. that they received, and is that actually then being reflected in the level of what they're doing in the student work?
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. We
No,
do have some mini tasks on the MLA formatting, so that is definitely going to be one of the things that we see if that was enough with them, because you know how we kind of internalize that ourselves and we think we're explaining and maybe we glossed over something. So hopefully we've hit it right so that they understand what is required of them.
gotcha. Makes sense. Okay, well, so now that we have a few more people who've been able to join us on our session, we're actually going to go into breakout rooms for just a few minutes, and I'm going to give a little bit of direction here, and then I'm going to send you out into a breakout room with a partner. And our goal will be to do a little bit of two things. We're going to kind of go more global now about our whole experience in skills and instruction for reflection. And I want us to also use a reflection piece inside the module that I think is a really nice thing. I want to show you. So I'm sharing my screen again now, and I'm going to pull this down and go to my library. I'll be in there when I can get in there. Sorry. Let's just, I'm just going to pull one here, my very first one in my library. And I want to show you in case you haven't noticed it before. But this whole idea of your module is set up to allow you to continue to do really good thinking, like those best practices that we've talked about in the national board standards that we've looked at several different times. The idea of customization, the idea of differentiation, and not just with the kids that you have this year, but you know now you've actually taught this module and you know some things that you would do differently. And yet next year, even though you know you want to do the same module, in a lot of ways, the kids that you have will once again determine what pieces of it might need some additional tweaking. So there is a nice component put in here in all of the modules. And if you have to scroll all the way to the bottom to the teacher reflection. Does everybody see it here down at the very bottom of the module? It's all the way at the very final piece of the module itself, right below student work, where you can attach student work here. But it's really just an open text box for you to capture those things. And when I was in the classroom, what I found helped me tremendously in teaching my modules was to capture these things as I was going. So on the day that you decided that two groups needed the idea that you needed to sit with them or rotate among them, Joy, you were talking between them, you were talking about that, Joy, and that several groups then were able to work more independently. I'd make a note of that down here, that you kind of want to assess where your kids are and you want to build that into the ladder for sure for next year for whoever needs whichever option. Going on and capturing it down here gives you the opportunity to remember it when you get there next year, if you don't have time right now to actually change it in the instructional ladder. Or even that idea, Julie, of what your expectations were in the writing could be captured right here so that you know exactly what you asked of kids. You could even make notes about particular students and what you thought you were going to see from that based on what you had done customization wise or differentiation wise for them. And then you could attach the samples of their student work here so that you can have it there to compare and see how it came out. This idea of teacher reflection, of course, could be done at the end of your module as well, which is where we are, in terms of what did you learn about students? What did you learn about the content that you were teaching there? And what would you keep? What would you do differently? It's just a space for you to be able to do that here. So as we go out to our breakout session, I would encourage you to make a few notes as you talk about with your partner about that. And then also, I want us to talk a little bit about our experience in skills and instruction as a whole. What have we learned? The idea of thinking about the fact that kids need skills is not a new concept. We've talked a lot about at the secondary level that we don't often get very discreet with our skills in our instructional planning because we make those automatic leaps in our heads as secondary teachers with content. And so I'm just curious at this point, thinking back and reflecting on skills and instruction in general. What have we learned? What's resonating with us that we know will permeate who we are as an instructor moving forward? And so I'd like for you to talk to your partner about that. And then when we come back, we're going to post some things in the chat. So you're going to for sure bring at least one thing back that you've learned or that is really sticking with you as a result of this quality skills and instruction. And also look at that reflection piece in your module with your partner. Okay. So I'm going to I'm going to mix up my Clark and Lincoln people since it's our last time to be together. So I'm going to send, okay. Nope. Just kidding. There we go. All right, we're going to only spend about 5 or 6 minutes, and then I'm going to bring us back. So everybody be ready to be speedy and talk through. Okay, so I turned the recording back on. I have now learned to pause it instead of just letting it record me while I wait and go in and out of chat rooms. So very quickly, because our time is slipping away from us here, I'd love to know, we're not going to do the chat so much right now. It's only 6 of us total. I would just really like to hear what's a major takeaway for you from our skills and instruction time that we've had together this semester. So I'm just going to call on everybody. That'll make it quicker. We won't have any wait time. Everybody be ready to go. And so Tina, we're going to try. Did you come back with some audio? Yay!
I realized that I think the big takeaway, like most of the other ones are realizing, is that we assume the students know skills more than they really do. And then we need to spend more time focusing on each little skill instead of just assuming they've already got it and move on when they don't.
Fascinating. So it helps us instructionally to truly know what needs to be accounted for with our kids. And then also, I think we see the result of that in the student work, because most of the time kids want to give us what it is that we're looking for. It helps us to account for giving them the practice to show what they know. Thank you. All right, Julie. I would call on you when you sneeze, right?
Sorry. I'm just saying what I learned.
Right? Yeah. What's your big takeaway from skills and instruction?
I would just say like intentionality. I'm in my 7th year teaching, and I feel like I just this year, maybe somewhat due to LDC, but also I think I started out the year like this, was just more intentional with everything that I was doing. And I feel like I pay a lot more attention to what I put my name on for copies and what, I put in front of my kids and things like that. And I think just being intentional, and LDC forces you to be intentional with all the prep work before you actually give anything to the kids. And so I think that could be helpful for a teacher really in any year of teaching, because they, people always tell you to be intentional, but they don't really teach you how to do that. They just say, be intentional. And I think LDC is very focused and intentional about how to teach teachers to focus on the small parts of teaching.
Very nice summation there. And I would almost say that, LDC didn't, like you said, you started the year with the idea of intentionality. And so LDC has been the perfect enhancement to give you the tools to do what it is you knew you wanted to do. Really good points there. All right, Joy, what you got?
I'll just piggyback off what Tina said. The fact that the different mini tasks let you see things that you might not have thought were needed. And so because we've been doing it for so long, we automatically make that leap. And this, with LDC and these mini tasks and the skills, it lets us
have any gaps in our instruction.
Really nice. Yeah, absolutely. And then Carrie, I know we still can't see you, but we could hear you a minute ago. What have you got, dear?
Tina and I talked about the same thing this year when I actually ended up doing 3 modules this year, just because I enjoyed the process of being able to make myself backward plan, and there wasn't any more frustration when the kids didn't come up with what I wanted them to come up with in the end, because I sat there and focused on all those little skills, and I realized how much I used to assume that they understood something already, a skill that they already had. And so I'd rather have more than enough skills that we need to cover to get to the end product, to get to make sure they understand everything, than not just assuming too much then.
What a really interesting point, that instructionally we can be frustrated with outcomes and think it's unintentionally think it's kids, or they just didn't do what we asked them to do. But with this process, it's become very transparent that we have a lot more control over that, the gaps, like you were saying, Joy, and that we have some control over helping with that instructionally to get the results that we actually were expecting or hoping to get. Really good point. So those are fantastic reflections on your process in quality skills and instruction. And Rachel, I don't want to leave you out, but I also don't want you to feel like you have to. Is there anything you'd like to add about your process in skills and instruction?
Well, of course, I'm on the coaching side of it. But one thing that I've taken away, and I think it piggybacks off what Julie said, is just intentionality is a word that's thrown around education a lot, but there really is a lot of follow through with it. And the whole process forces the educators to slow down and think, is this really what I want my students to be doing? And I think that's a good thing. And I think the reflection piece is a good thing, because I think very often educators don't think that they have time to reflect, but LDC embeds those opportunities throughout. So I think both those things are great takeaways that I took from my time with it.
Absolutely. Really, really incredible reflections, y'all. And I know we started out with a couple of little technical difficulties, but what a wonderful session. And I hope that the other ones of us who couldn't join us tonight will watch this session, because I think there's some really good conversation even in just the reflection and debrief that we've been doing tonight. And that idea of taking these thoughts forward and having it begin to continue to transform us as educators as we go forward and plan and plan and plan again, it's what we do, and the difference that it makes in some of this intentional planning and the process that we've been going through. And so unfortunately, this is our final session for this semester, for this year. But like I said, in some ways that's a nice thing, because that means we're getting close to summer, right? So that's always good to think about and know that we're getting there. You do have an opportunity with your instructional ladders to submit them to national peer review. And Rachel and I were actually talking briefly about peer review before we started the session, and that idea of letting other people look at it and give you feedback as well is such an important part of this process that I would really encourage you to submit to national peer review. The date to submit by for this offering is May 6th. And there will be an email follow-up that will do a couple of things. So one, the email follow-up will be a final goodbye from me, for at least for now, but we'll also provide instructions for you on how you could submit to national peer review, and also have a spreadsheet where you can sign up for a one-on-one if you want to submit to national peer review, but you just want to talk one-on-one with me or with Katie, or with Monique, who's been with us several times over the course of this semester. You can sign up for a time with us to work through that before you submit to national peer review. And so we hope you'll take advantage of that. Y'all got some really good things that you've been doing in your classroom. You are fantastic educators, and the students of Kentucky are so very fortunate to have you as their classroom teachers. And the kind of thinking that you've done together this year has been wonderful to be a part of. You've helped me grow and to continue to learn as well. And I really hope that our paths cross again in the very near future. So with that being said, we're going to finish out the same way we finished out all of our other sessions. And I'm going to go ahead and, well, I can't stop that yet, but I'm going to ask you to post in the chat what's really resonating with you, what final word or phrase are you really thinking about, and you know our answer cannot be dinner. That's kind of the one thing you can't put up there, but what are you really resonating with and thinking, reflecting on right now as we finish out our last session as far as the kind of work we've done together this year. And then we'll close the session out. There you go, intentionality, yep. Standards-driven intentionality. Ooh, that diligence. It does take diligence, yeah, but it pays off. And accounting for skills, yep. As secondary teachers, we for sure need that reminder. Well, it has been an absolute pleasure having sessions with you guys, and I'm proud to call you fellow educators. And I'm going to stop recording now.